Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to StarryTelling, where we explore the stories, myth, and magic of the starry skies. I'm here with sacred astronomer and astrologer Gemini Brett. My name's Amanda Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub, and we are so happy that you're here. Today, we're going to cover a couple things. The first is we're going to review the scavenger hunt from last week, and it's still very, very relevant for right now. So if you missed the episode last week, you can still actually do the scavenger hunt. It's a Mercury retrograde scavenger hunt, and it will still be really impactful for you. And then we're going to talk about this really juicy topic of, is astrology real? And we're not going to cover the entire gamut of the conversation that we could be having, but we're going to start to talk about some of it. So Brett, I'm so happy you're here. Thank you so much for joining us. And let's talk about last week's scavenger hunt first.
Yeah, so we were talking about Mercury Cazimi, right? So Mercury between Earth and the sun. And this happens about every 4 months, or it happens pi times a year. And working with that intentionally, because we know that Mercury retrogrades can bring some disruption to things mercurial, or maybe mercurial overload. And I think we saw some pretty interesting things like on Earth and the global reality support that. And also just like the magic that can happen with Mercury alignments, right? So I'm wondering, were you able to do something? Did you go to the sky yesterday?
Yes. So I thought about this long and hard. So essentially what Brett wanted us to do was to bring an offering to Mercury and then have an ask. So instead of just, making an intention or setting an intention, but actually like go with an offering and commit to that offering through February 20th, right? I want to make sure that's right. Till the end of Mercury retrograde.
Yeah. Mercury stations direct then. I mean, you might feel that you want to hold it a little bit longer too, if it's really paying off for you.
We'll see if I can do it. All right. So basically, the offering that I gave to Mercury was that I agreed to not fill any of the space before bedtime with any sort of media. So no like social media, no listening to the podcast that you sent me last night, for example, Brett, which was Brett texted me a podcast to listen to, and it sounded so interesting, but I was like, I told Mercury I wouldn't do that. So no. So basically clearing that space was my offering. And my ask is to get the name for the TED Talk that I'm working on, because it just hasn't completely landed. I gave some options to the inner circle to vote on, and it was like almost equal between all of them. And I think it's because not one of them is really like totally hitting what I'm trying to convey yet. So I asked Mercury for the title. I haven't gotten it yet, obviously, but that's what I'm playing with during this Mercury retrograde.
Awesome. Yeah, I had a pretty magical Mercury moment yesterday. I'm preparing to teach this class for Astrology Hub, the Sacred Astronomy course. And so I'm trying to like channel in how to do that in a good order. And a lot of it's cool because Mercury retrograde and retrograde planets in general, like they're bringing us back, right? So a lot of this content that I'll be teaching, I've taught before, but I'm kind of reordering it. I like to teach with like, if I go outside, what am I experiencing? But astrologers have already kind of learned the chart in a way that isn't necessarily there. So I want to like now lead with what people kind of already know astrologically, and then bring it to the nature piece. So I'm just kind of reorganizing, and going back and like, so that was the piece for me. And I kind of told Mercury, like my offering has been, because I considered the late night things too, but as you saw last night, that's not what I gave. But I gave instead like, all right, I'm not going to like actually do any of these classes until you're direct. Like I'm just going to be in receiver mode. And I'm like not even going to like write so much. I'm just going to like start having the vision and slow it down. Mm-hmm. So we talked last time, and it's interesting. We were talking about Mercury retrograde last time and the complications, and then my mic wasn't loud enough. So we see in the YouTube post, like a lot of people like, oh man, it's too quiet, right? Which I realized when I was listening on my phone back to the thing, but not on my computer, it sounded okay. But because I'm like back here and just not honoring microphone distance and stuff like that. But, ironically real, right?
Yes.
And then I don't know where I was going with that, which is also part of it. Oh, right. We were talking about this kind of meta retrograde with Mercury, how Mercury's moving through the elements and either does 4 cycles in the same element or 6. And we're just coming out of 6 water element Mercury loops. And now we're going into 6 air element Mercury loops. And if you know your zodiacal order, like Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, we go Gemini, Cancer from the air to the water. So Mercury goes through those elements backwards. So this is a huge shift right now where we're moving out of like 2 years of water sign, like overmind is what I like to call Mercury. It's like the collective consciousness. It's been in the dream. It's, and some of it's clearly been the nightmare as well, but it's just like harder to like track the data or maybe even communicate the things. And so this is a really wonderful time though, where those visions are going to start coming into like the spells of the spoken word. And it was cool to see how some of that, from my experience, like manifested on Earth yesterday. So I'm going to show an example, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And we'll do a little chart. I need permission to share, please. I'll speak to the A-Team angels as I fill my Mercury cup. One I don't have an example of a chart for, but there was a Time magazine article, which I'll encourage people to read, which is basically saying like celebrating how they were able to like long-term, I'll say it this way, like cast spells to influence politics in this country. I want to leave that there. I don't want to like say too much or get political. But if you read that article, regardless of what you're rooting for, it's like, what is going on here? Like this stuff doesn't sound that legal. It doesn't sound so safe, but it really sounds like, hey, this is like the spell you've been under. And now we're going to tell you in words what it was, which like, that's a long conversation about why would you say, or like, is this predicting something? I don't know, but that tripped me out. Right. Yeah. And like, I couldn't even believe it. So I had to go read that a couple of times. It was just really trying to calm the nerves. So that was one thing. Another thing was, thanks to this cat that I call the prophet, and I spell it Profit, Elon Musk, who's a rather eccentric cat. I'm sure most people know, very, technocratic gazillionaire, ready to put an implant in your brain and whatnot, and very excited to blast rockets to Mars to save Earth, which seems strange. But Tesla Inc., his car company, his electric car company, which itself is a very kind of Aquarian thing, right? They had to submit their like annual investments paper yesterday to their stockholders and showed that they invested $1.5 billion in Bitcoin. And Bitcoin skyrocketed, like literally. I just realized usually I'll cast a 0 Aries chart wheel for Elon Musk because we don't know his birth time. So I just want to say something about this chart because I didn't do that. This is the time of this day, which we know he was born in South Africa, where the moon was very strongly configured to Mercury. The moon was in Virgo all day long. We're not confused about the sign, but this is when kind of like the power of this mutual reception, as we call it in astrology, moon in Virgo and Mercury in Cancer, like they're kind of on a foreign exchange program in each other's signs. It's like most powerful at this time with the moon applying to perfect the sextile with Mercury. You've got to look at Elon Musk's chart. If you're just listening to this on the podcast, Elon Musk was born on June 28th, 1971 in Pretoria, South Africa, time unknown. I cast 9 p.m. to kind of strengthen this mutual reception between the Virgo moon and Cancer Mercury. And then I found out later that it also puts Aquarius Mars right at the ascendant, right? And this guy's literally building rocket ships to ascend to Mars. So that kind of felt good. Anyway, yesterday, Tesla Inc. announces basically that it wasn't yesterday that they made this investment, and that's a retrograde thing, right? It had already happened, but yesterday we got the news of it, that they put $1.5 billion into Bitcoin. And Elon Musk also said that that Tesla will soon start accepting Bitcoin for payment and other cryptocurrencies for payment for their cars. It's a very Aquarian thing. You know, whether you think that's good or bad or whatever, I'd love to have that conversation. But for now, it happened. Look at where the Mercury cazimi was in respect to Elon Musk's chart. Mercury aligned between Earth and the sun. And this is called cazimi, which means in the heart of it, some suggest. And it was right at Elon Musk's Mars.
Wow.
Right. So this cat's kind of like impulsive, right? We have seen through like Twitter records and other things, and, you know, very just kind of technologically driven. And so I love seeing this. And by the way, the next time Mercury retrogrades and comes between Earth and the sun will be on the day of a solar eclipse in June, on June 10th of this year, 2021. And that one's going to align right with Elon Musk's Venus. And then the next one, the third of the year, Mercury aligning between Earth and sun. So retrograde Mercury conjoined sun will be in Libra with Mars, very close to Elon Musk's natal Uranus, and forming a grand air trine with his natal Mars and Venus. And I could go on and on into the astrology from there. That's not really what this podcast is meant to be. So I'm going to close this chart down. But I think a thing that's so amazing is, and we see this often, and it's really cool when it's happening like in our own lives. That's what matters most, right? When we're really seeing the astrology take shape, and when we align our intentions to the signs of the times and really work these things magically for the sake of our own growth or our understanding or our navigation of challenges. Yeah. But when we see things happening like on the global level, right? Like Bitcoin went up 20 something % yesterday, basically because of this one dude, right? And you can totally see it in his nativity. And I don't know, I'm sure there's a Tesla chart out there. I haven't like checked it, but it was cool because I always like when we have quote unquote proof of astrology from real world events.
You know, Brett, the other thing, I don't know if you noticed this, one of the Super Bowl commercials was for Inspiration 4, which is going to be the first civilian spacecraft, which is supposed to launch in the fall, which it was like a kind of a cryptic commercial, didn't say much. It was like, to learn more, go to Inspiration 4. So I looked it up, and they're basically sending non-astronauts to space. I was like, whoa, that's so super Aquarian as well. Like all these things happening that are very indicative of the future direction. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, inspiration itself can be a very Aquarian word. I mean, I kind of see that in the Leo Aquarius axis.
Right.
You know, sometimes Mercury does represent the little guy. So like civilians going to space there, just this air paradigm. I mean, so much of that is taking shape with the recent Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. And, you know, astrologers have been talking about that, you know, at length, right? But this is Mercury who's now kind of bringing and shifting the energy towards the air in a element where, you know, Mercury is said to be very comfortable. And I think one of the offerings here is like dynamic and very important problem solving, like solutions oriented, but that's also going to depend on like accurate information going around. And that's the challenge right now. And that also makes me want to retrograde or fast forward away from that part of this potential conversation. So I've been kind of contemplating yesterday, you know, if I'm sitting with somebody who's an astrology hater, is it good enough for me to say, all right, hey, look at Elon Musk's chart, look at the news yesterday, look at what happened with Bitcoin. I can even show it in the numbers, where Bitcoin went and where it went from. Doesn't that prove astrology? And if I can show you 100 cases, are you willing to look at that? And I'm also considering this because I had a family visit recently. But that's not necessarily good enough. Why should we be convincing anyone anyway? But this is something that people are asking me often, or I so often see it, in the posts at communities like Astrology Hub, of like, how do I share this love with my family members? Or even like, how do I convince them that I'm not crazy or possessed, or lost? And also, I'm very interested in actually being able to kind of astronomically, I guess, defend astrology against the attack of rationalists. So it's a short conversation for us today, but I thought maybe we could unpack that giant thing a little bit.
Unpack that giant thing in about 12 minutes. Let's see how we do it. It's a huge question, Brett, and it comes up all the time. I know I see it in the group too. I know when I first started getting into astrology, I really felt passionate about defending it. And now it's more when it actually comes up in intelligent conversation and someone's genuinely curious, how do we speak to it in a way that makes sense? There's a like practical, tangible, how does it make sense? And then why does it work? Yeah, I mean, it definitely comes up. Why does it work? And does it actually work? I mean, the easiest answer is go get a reading and see for yourself. Like that to me is just experience it. And if you find it compelling, go deeper. If you don't, then leave it alone. But I mean, that's when people have a direct experience of something, then it changes everything. Once I had my first reading with Natasha, you never had to convince me ever again that it was true or it worked because it was so real for me.
But you were also open. So a lot of people can have a reading without experiencing it. Rather, they'll just experience their cynicism, right? Which is what they expect to experience. And so it's really difficult. I mean, even if we're going with an open heart and an open mind, not to get lost in our expectations of a thing, right? I mean, that's obviously a gigantic question in and of itself. I have been able to show a couple different NASA astronomers who were open-minded enough to have the conversation. I've certainly met a few also who were not, right? And it was a very quick thing where I was ridiculed a little bit and conversation over. And I like no longer want to fight. I mean, I'm in the same place where I really don't want to try so much to like, quote unquote, awaken some sleeper. Like I realize that people are where they're meant to be, and who am I to try to shake anyone awake anyway? And I also don't need to go like running around convincing people to come swim in the astrology pool just because the water is amazing and they should come and enjoy the healing, right? Because if they're not interested in swimming, then that's just folly, right? And I'm getting close to mature enough to know that, right? But when people are open-minded enough to consider, I really like stepping into that conversation very gradually and kind of from more of a, especially if I'm speaking with scientists, from kind of a scientific, kind of grounded, feet on the ground approach. And that doesn't usually look at, well, here's this great Mercury happening and here's Elon Musk's chart and here's Bitcoin. Like that just feels too removed. People, I think, are so aligned with the idea that just coincidence has happened. And that we're just like, making pictures out of the clouds, right? But coincidence actually means two things that are happening simultaneously, right? And that is so much of what we are looking into astrologically. So I'm becoming less of like a materialist as an astrologer. And when I say that, I'm not trying to say like, I'm in it for the money. Like that's laughable. I mean that I like personally there to be some kind of tangible, astronomical, natural thing that I can point my finger to, right? And that's kind of this idea of StarryTelling podcast and sacred astronomy. Like I like to say astrology is so much more than some symbolic language alone. It is the poetic breath of nature, right? And I'm also honoring that there is a lot of things and timing techniques and you kind of rules that I can't necessarily justify in nature. And I'm becoming more and more personally okay with that as I study astrology and see some of these things that I can't necessarily understand, see that they work. But if I'm talking with somebody, so I spoke with a JPL scientist, right? Jet Propulsion's laboratory. It's in a sense like an arm of NASA, not really, but they work together. These guys put robots on Mars and drive them. And he was open-minded enough to have the conversation. And we were at late night at kind of after a party. And by the end of it, I have like a straw sticking out of an orange and I'm walking that around the room. And, I'm kind of showing him like physically these things of what the zodiac actually is. And he's kind of correcting my terminology that I'm choosing to use. And I'm open to that. And so, what would you like to call that? Oh, okay, I can see that. Okay, And by the end, he's like, that's a thing. And then I was like, cool. Now will you share your birth information with me? Yeah. And then I told him what he does for JPL based upon his chart. And then it was a long conversation. We were up like 5 hours, and I was teaching him. I mean, this kid, very bright young guy, and he learned like the bulk of astrological theory in like 5 hours. And by the end of it was looking at charts and pointing out some really cool things.
Wow.
But it was a great conversation. The way that I always start it, and I think it's if you, whoever's listening out there, are in this experience, there's one thing that I love to say, which is that if somebody's open-hearted enough and open-minded enough to have the conversation, I just lead like this. I have a hypothesis that astronomical cycles influence our energetic experience as earthlings.
Okay, I have a hypothesis.
Okay, that astronomical cycles influence our energetic experience as earthlings.
Okay.
Okay, so agree or disagree?
Oh, well, agree.
Right, but right.
Okay, fine, disagree. I'm scientist, disagree.
So what are things where we might see astronomical cycles that we know influence us that you would bring up as an example to somebody? So let me ask that of you, Amanda. Like, what are some things where you would tell people like, hey, this is happening astronomically? Obviously, it's influencing our experience as earthlings.
The obvious one is the moon.
Why is it obvious?
Because I think most people can relate with the energetic change that they experience, especially around the full moon. I mean, and you can even say to women who have experienced their cycle changing with the moon. I mean, there's things that are very tangible about the moon. It also is obviously influencing our tides. So it's a celestial body that has, to me, very obvious impact on our life here on Earth. And the sun, I mean, come on. Going to sleep and waking up when it's light and dark. I mean, that's also an astronomical cycle, the sun.
Yeah, I like to start there. So let's talk about the moon a bit, right? So yeah, and women, as a man, like women really are our teachers here because of course I'm having monthly cycles too in respect to the phases of the moon, but I don't have like the biological feedback. And of course, not all women are regular with their menses or whatever, but those who are like at that time of life, like, and it's not like not everybody's synced to the full moon.
Right. Sometimes and actually, it can flip flop. Like it'll be sometimes the full moon, sometimes the new. Yeah. Anyways.
So that can make it challenging. There's also something really important about the moon that we've lost, which I love to teach, which is like, you used to never travel during new moon time because it's dark at night. Robbers on the road, people will say a lot, but you could just stub your toe or break the wheel of your cart or whatever it is. When you're out like walking under the full moonlight, it's just such a different world. And you living in Hawaii and under dark skies, like you have a monthly experience of that. A lot of us are so buried in the light pollution of the urban centers that really full moon and new moon, it's no different. It's just street lights, it's city lights, like you really can't tell, right? So the tides is a very interesting thing because an argument that's actually often made against astrology is that according to Newton's theories of gravity, Somebody in the same room of you has more of a gravitational pull than the sun does. And according to many theories,
because they're closer.
Yeah, because they're closer. So the equation is m1 m2 over d squared. So that's like the masses of me and you if we are in the same room, but the distance squared is so small. Whereas if it's me and the sun is obviously so much more massive, but so much further away. And since that's squared in the denominator, then that number gets very small, right? But actually, even according to the accepted physics of our day, both the moon and the sun, and actually Jupiter too, have more of a tidal force on you than somebody standing next to you. So a lot of times people will lead with, oh, the tides, right? So moon and sun, like, get together and separate and pull on the moon, on the Earth's waters. And that's a monthly thing, and you can track it, and you are made of 70% water too. So no matter like how that's going to influence you, clearly these tidal forces will pull your waters, right? But I like, and I love where you went with this. I like where you started, because we could also then go to the seasons. And when you said the sun, I thought maybe we'd go there, right? But just day and night. You only have to live 24 hours to experience this profound cycle of yin and yang. And you can experience it every 24 hours. And none can argue with the truth that we feel different at 3 a.m. than we do at 3 p.m. Mm-hmm. The flowers open and receive the light, and they close at night to dream and rest. And so should we. And we are configured to do that,
Right. So I guess the argument is that, well, yeah, the sun and the moon, they're bigger, they're closer, but like all those other planets out there, they're not big enough or close enough to really impact us. Is that the argument?
Well, sure. I mean, that's a good argument where people could go, right? So I always just like to take it slow. Let's take it like one thing at a time. And can we just at least agree that daytime and nighttime are different animals? Mm-hmm. Right. And if somebody denies that, it's just conversation over, but I'll usually go there. So start with the day, right? Or day and night. Day is an interesting term because it can mean day and night, 24 hours, or it can mean daylight, right? But, right. And then I'll maybe go to the month, go to the year. And I really like to start with sun, moon, and earth. And then we can start going out further, right? So like last time we were talking about, well, Mercury's between us and the sun right now. And it's not gravity, maybe it's electromagnetical, maybe it's tidal, maybe we don't know, but there's some kind of interference pattern happening there. But if I can just start with day and night, why does the sun rise and set? Because the earth is spinning, according to our modern physics. Right. And that's where I want to kind of play with you as we move forward into this idea of sunwise motion, or the primary motion, or the spinning of the earth, because this is often a disconnect between our astronomical experience outside and how we come to know an astrology chart. And we can get into the 4 R's of the reach and the rest and the roots and the rise. But there's just a little thing for folks out there. I would love to know in the comment section how people have addressed what astrology is with doubters. Do you feel alone when you're with your family at home? Are you frustrated because you have this great love and this passion, but you can't get other people to be interested in it? Should you try? But also, like, what arguments, if you've been in a state where you can have the conversation in the debate, like, what arguments have you brought forth that you found success with, and which ones have you brought that you don't? One thing you said earlier, man, that I also just want to address is like, well, I mean, we all feel different at full moon. Usually people who are having this conversation and denying astrology, they don't.
But then you can talk to them about the word lunacy and lunatic. You can talk about how the police departments and the hospitals notice a spike in people coming in. There's a spike in crime. I mean, there are certain things that you could kind of get analytical about that. And even just the term lunacy and lunatic coming from the influence of the moon on our emotional state, right?
Yeah. And importantly, if you go there, make sure you have the data.
Totally.
And make sure you have it literally in a place where you can say, hey, read this, like look at these statistics. There's a lot of things that we learn, like there's more people born during full moon actually aren't true.
Right.
So there's a short journey through space today.
I love it. And you know what, Brett, it's been so interesting, the journey with my family. I'm like, for sure, the like way out there person in my family. It's been fun to watch the journey of my family with me in my love of astrology, which happened just like 9-10 years ago is when I started to fall in love with astrology. The point at which I feel they really started listening to me was after 2020 or during 2020, because at Christmas 2019, I was visiting in California. We all sat down at the dinner table. My dad said, Amanda, why don't you tell us about 2020? What are the astrologers saying is going to happen in 2020? And I sat there and I shared everything that you guys have shared with me. And I was like, big, huge change. It's massive. Like life will never be the same. You know, I'm saying all these big, huge things. And in March, April, they're like, whoa, I guess that astrology thing works, huh? Like, yes, it does. There's a reason why I'm so into it. But, you know, so sometimes it's just a little bit of time and letting people marinate with it.
Right. But we can see in that too, right? Because you were asked. And that means that you've been patient enough not to force information that will never be received. And that takes time. And it usually demands that we release the need to inform those who do not want to be informed. And once that stops, they suddenly want to be. And of course, that's been a huge call to astrology in this last year. Not only do many people have more time on their hands and are able to kind of bring themselves to the study that they've had this love for a long time, but there's been a lot of evidence of, you know, maybe people didn't say exactly what it was going to be, but they certainly said it was going to be. Right. Exactly. And so astrology's definitely flared up. All right. So I know we have to go, but I'm going to leave with a little sky work or scavenger hunt for the week ahead.
Nice.
We will get to the point here where now the sun has passed Jupiter and Saturn far enough by, and Mercury will retrograde far enough, I guess, before the sun in the zodiac, that all of these planets, Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn, over the next week or two, will start becoming visible as morning stars. We're just at this place where Venus is disappearing as a morning star. And without really needing to know why or any of that, if you just go experience it, right? And it takes some time, like Venus is on a 19-month thing, right? But you experience a few of those cycles, they really start to teach you directly. So I very much encourage people to wake up before the sun over the course of this next week and just look for planets on the eastern horizon, in the beams of the sun, and just see how that changes. And while you're there, allow yourself to fully experience sunrise.
Love it.
And yeah, let's just stop there. So this will be a sunrise week. And, you know, really tune into that word rise, and maybe even bring this physics kind of point of view of why is the sun rising right now? And that will bring us back to astronomical cycles influence our energetic experience as earthlings. And this is one of the things that, yes, indeed, makes astrology very real.
Awesome, Brett. Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. And we have our assignment for the week. So you kind of have two. If you didn't do the Mercury assignment from last week, if you haven't made your offering to Mercury, if you haven't asked for what you would like to receive during this Mercury retrograde period, you can still do that now. And then, of course, we will be doing our scavenger hunt for the week, which is, like Brett said, looking at the sunrise and paying attention to which planets you're seeing there, and also really feeling into what it is to be with the sun at that point in time. So thank you so much, Brett. Thank you, everybody, for being here. If you're interested in Brett's upcoming Sacred Astronomy for Astrologers class, which is going to be happening in the spring, you're going to have the opportunity to join our wait list starting next week. My gosh, Mercury retrograde, blah, blah, blah. Hard for me to talk. starting next week, you'll be able to join the waitlist, and we can't wait to see you there. So take care, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode.